I stood at the edge of the driveway, my heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. I had been away for only 3 weeks, helping a friend recover from surgery in another state. When I pulled up to Oakwood, our family estate, I expected to see the familiar ivy-covered brick and the tires swaying in the breeze. Instead, my eyes landed on a giant, bright red "Sold" banner stretched across a wooden sign at the front gate. My breath hitched in my throat. This had to be a mistake. This house had been in the Miller family for 4 generations. It was the place where our parents had carved our heights into the kitchen pantry door, and where we had scattered our mother's ashes only a year ago. I scrambled out of my car, my legs feeling like jelly. The front door, which usually stood as a grand welcome, looked cold and abandoned. I reached for my phone, my fingers trembling as I dialed my brother Mark's number for the 10th time that morning. It went straight to voicemail, just as it had for the last 3 days. The silence coming from the other end of the line felt like a physical weight, crushing the air out of my lungs. The shock intensified when a massive professional moving truck rumbled up the gravel driveway, kicking up clouds of dust. 2 men in blue jumpsuits hopped out, carrying rolls of packing tape and stacks of flattened cardboard boxes. They didn't even look at me as they walked toward the porch with the confidence of people who had every right to be there. "Excuse me," I shouted, my voice cracking with desperation. "What are you doing? This is my house. There has been a huge misunderstanding." The taller mover paused, checking a digital clipboard. "Address is 42, Oakwood Lane, right?" The owner, a Mr. Mark Miller, cleared the move for today. "Everything inside is to be packed and hauled to a storage facility in the city. We're just doing our jobs, ma'am." I felt like the world was spinning in circles. Mark wasn't the owner. We were co-owners. According to our father's will, the house was left to both of us equally. He couldn't possibly be doing this. I watched in horror as they began to carry out the velvet armchair that my father used to sit in while he read us stories. It felt like they were dismembering my childhood, piece by piece, while I stood there completely powerless to stop the clock. I retreated to my car, my mind racing through every possible scenario. Mark had always been the spender, in the family, the one who chased get-rich-quick schemes and wore designer suits he couldn't afford. After our parents passed, he had complained about the dullness of the suburbs and the high cost of maintaining such a large estate. But he had never mentioned selling it. In fact, we had agreed to keep it as a sanctuary for our future children. I opened my laptop and logged into the county's public property records, my pulse thundering in my ears. I bypassed the login screens with frantic keystrokes, searching for the deed to Oakwood Lane. My eyes blurred as the data loaded, but then I saw it. A digital paper trail that turned my blood to ice. A deed transfer had been filed only 5 days ago. It showed that the property had been sold to a developer called Crestline Holdings for a staggering $4 million. I scrolled down to the bottom of the document to see the signatures. There was Mark's bold, loopy handwriting, and right next to it, a signature that made me gasp. It was my name, written in a perfect imitation of my cursive style. I stared at the screen until the letters began to swim. Mark hadn't just sold the house. He had committed a felony. He had forged my signature on a legal deed to bypass the inheritance laws that protected my half of the property. The calculated deception was breathtaking. He had waited until I was out of the state, knowing I would be distracted and away from the mail. He must have intercepted the legal notices and hired a crooked notary to witness a signature that wasn't mine. I felt a wave of nausea wash over me. This was my brother, the person I had shared a nursery with, the person who had promised to protect me after our parents died. He had erased our entire family history for a secret payday. He knew how much this house meant to me. To him, it was just bricks and mortar that could be traded for a luxury condo and a fast car. To me, it was the only thing I had left of our mother and father. I closed the laptop with a snap. I wasn't just grieving anymore. I was entering a state of cold, hard fury. Mark thought he had won, but he had forgotten one very important detail. I tried calling Mark one last time, and to my surprise, he actually picked up. "Leo, hey. How's the trip?" His voice was casual, almost bored, as if he weren't currently stealing millions of dollars from me. "I'm at the house, Mark," I said, my voice as sharp as a razor. "There are movers here. There is a sold sign on the lawn. And I'm looking at a forged deed on my computer screen. What have you done?" There was a long, Heavy silence on the other end. I could hear his shallow breathing. Then, his tone shifted. The nice brother persona vanished, replaced by a cold, arrogant sneer. Look, Leo, be reasonable. That house is a money pit. You were never going to agree to sell, and I needed the cash now. I've already put a down payment on a place in the city. You'll get your half of the money, eventually. Just let it go. It's done. The papers are signed. The buyers are happy, and there's nothing you can do to stop the deal now. I couldn't believe his nerve. He sounded like he had done me a favor by committing a crime. You forged my name, Mark. That's prison time. He laughed, a dry, hollow sound. Good luck proving it in time to stop the bulldozers. Growing up in Oakwood was like living in a fairy tale. Our father was a local historian, and our mother was an architect. They poured their souls into that house. Every crown molding, every hidden nook, and every garden path was designed with love. Mark and I used to play hide and seek in the secret passageway that ran behind the library. Back then, we were a team. I was the quiet one who mapped out our games, and he was the loud one who led the charge. But as we got older, something changed in Mark. He grew resentful of the old-fashioned values our parents held. He hated that our father spent money on antique books instead of buying a flashy European car. He started seeing the house as a burden rather than a blessing. When Dad got sick, Mark was rarely there. He was always closing a deal or networking at expensive bars. I was the one who sat by Dad's bed, reading him the history of the house he loved so much. In his final days, Dad grabbed my hand and whispered, "The house is the heart of the family, Leo. Keep the heart beating." I didn't realize then that the biggest threat to that heart was sitting right across the dinner table. Mark's debts had been piling up for years. I knew he had a problem with overspending, but I didn't realize how deep the hole actually was. He had borrowed money from friends, who weren't really friends, and his small marketing firm was hemorrhaging cash. He had tried to ask me for my share of the inheritance early, but I had refused, telling him the money was tied up in the estate's maintenance. He must have felt trapped, like a cornered animal. To him, Oakwood wasn't a home. It was a giant piggy bank that he just needed to break open. He had spent months studying my handwriting, practicing my signature on napkins and scrap paper. He had found a developer, Crestline Holdings, who was known for moving fast and asking very few questions. They wanted to tear down the house and build 10 luxury townhomes on the lot. The thought of Oakwood being replaced by sterile, gray boxes made me want to scream. Mark didn't care about the neighbors, the history, or the land. He only cared about the wire transfer that would clear his debts and put him back in the elite circle he craved so badly. He was willing to trade his sister for a fresh start. According to the inheritance laws in our state, a property held in a joint tenancy cannot be sold without the expressed, notarized consent of all owners. Mark knew this, which is why he went to such lengths to forge my identity. He had even used an old photo of my ID to convince a shady remote notary that I was present on a video call. The level of planning was terrifying. It wasn't an impulsive mistake. It was a calculated heist. I realized that if I went to the police immediately, the house might still be torn down while the legal battle dragged on for years. Developers like Crestline move with incredible speed. They had already secured demolition permits. Once the house was gone, no amount of money or court orders could bring it back. I needed a way to stop the sale instantly, something that would make the buyers run away in terror. I needed a legal kill switch. I spent the night in a cheap motel room, surrounded by old family files and boxes of my father's notes, searching for a miracle. I knew my father was a man of secrets and safety nets. He knew Mark's character better than anyone. There had to be something he left behind. The buyer, Crestline Holdings, was headed by a man named Victor Vane. Victor was a vulture developer. He specialized in buying historic estates at a discount and flipping them before the community could protest. I looked him up and saw a trail of destroyed landmarks in his wake. He wasn't a man who cared about ethics, he only cared about the bottom line. I sent an email to his office, explaining that the deed was fraudulent and that I had not signed it. The reply I got was cold and dismissive. His legal team claimed that they had a valid, notarized document, and that any family disputes were for us to settle privately. They were basically telling me to get lost while they prepared the bulldozers. I realized they weren't on it, or at least, they were happy to look the other way to get the land. The move-out was scheduled to be finished by the end of the week, and the demolition was set for Monday morning. I had less than 72 hours to save my life's history. I felt a cold sweat break out across my forehead. I was alone, outgunned, and my own brother was the one leading the attack against me. I called an old family friend, a retired real estate lawyer named Mr. Henderson. He had been my father's confidant for decades. When I explained what Mark had done, I could hear the audible gasp on the other end of the line. Mark did what? That boy always had a streak of greed. But this is criminal, Leo. Henderson's voice was shaky but firm. He told me that proving forgery in court takes time. Time I didn't have. You need a cloud on the title, he explained. Something that makes the ownership so messy that no developer will touch it. Did your father ever mention a trust? He talked about setting one up before he passed, something separate from the main will. I remembered my father spending long hours in the attic during his final months, sorting through old deeds and dusty ledgers. He had always told me, if things get complicated, look for the blue folder. I had searched the main office and the safe, but I had never found a blue folder. I realized that Mark had likely searched the same places. If there was a secret document, it had to be somewhere Mark wouldn't think to look, or somewhere he was too afraid to go. The signature on the deed was almost perfect. Mark had captured the way I crossed my T's and the slight tilt of the L. It was a masterpiece of betrayal. As I stared at the high-resolution scan of the forgery, I felt a strange sense of detachment. This wasn't just a legal document, it was a map of my brother's heart. He had spent hours practicing how to be me, just so he could delete me from his life. I wondered if he felt any guilt as he traced the lines. Probably not. Mark had a way of justifying everything. He would tell himself I didn't need the house, or that he was investing the money for both of us. But the law doesn't care about justifications. It cares about consent. I contacted a forensic document examiner, a woman who specialized in identifying forgeries. She told me that while the signature looked good, the pressure of the pen and the rhythm of the strokes would reveal the truth under a microscope. I can give you a report, she said, but a judge won't see it for weeks. I thanked her, but I knew the truth. By the time a judge read that report, Oakwood would be a pile of rubble and a memory. I thought back to the rainy afternoons Dad and I spent in the library. He used to tell me that a house is like a book. You have to know how to read between the lines. He loved the history of Oakwood, often talking about the original deed from the 1800s and the various protections he had placed on the land. He was a man who believed in legacy. He hated the way the world was becoming disposable. I remembered him once saying, "I've made sure this place stays in the family, Leo, regardless of what the future holds. There are layers of safety here that even a lawyer would have trouble peeling back." At the time, I thought he was just being a romantic historian. Now, I realized he was a strategist. He knew Mark's weaknesses. He knew that one day, the spender might try to sell the soul of the family. He must have hidden a document that acted as a legal shield. But where? The movers were still clearing the house. I had to get inside one last time. I had to find the blue folder before the locks were changed and the no trespassing signs went up for good. I waited until the movers took their lunch break. I slipped through the back garden, using the key I had kept hidden under a loose stone in the bird bath. The house felt different, empty and echoing. The smell of my mother's lavender polish was being replaced by the scent of dust and cardboard. I hurried up the back stairs to the attic. It was a cramped, sweltering space filled with holiday decorations and old luggage. Mark had already been through here. I could see where boxes had been tossed aside. He was looking for jewelry or gold, something he could pawn. He wouldn't have looked for a piece of paper hidden in the structure itself. I remembered a story Dad told me about the heart of the house. He said the heart was located where the two main beams met. I crawled toward the center of the attic, peeling back a layer of old insulation. My fingers brushed against something hard and cold. It was a small metal box, bolted to the floorboard. It was painted a dull, faded blue. My heart skipped a beat. This was it. This was the blue folder Dad had mentioned. But it wasn't a folder at all. It was a vault. The metal box was locked with a combination dial. I tried the usual numbers, birthdays, anniversaries, but nothing worked. I sat in the dark, hot attic, sweat dripping down my face, trying to think like my father. He loved puzzles. He loved history. What was the most important date to him? I tried the date Oakwood was founded. 1884. Click. The dial turned. I pulled the lid open, and inside, wrapped in a piece of oilcloth, was a thick stack of legal documents. On top was a letter addressed to me. Leo. It read, "If you are reading this, I assume Mark has tried to do something foolish. I love your brother, but his greed is a fire that consumes everything. This house is a trust, Leo. I moved it into a private family land trust 10 years ago. Neither of you owns the house. The trust owns the house, and you are the sole trustee. Mark is merely a beneficiary with no power to sell." I felt a massive weight lift off my shoulders. A land trust is a separate legal entity. Mark's signature on that deed wasn't just a forgery. It was legally impossible. He had tried to sell something he didn't even own. I carefully pulled out the main document, the Oakwood Perpetual Trust. It was signed, witnessed, and most importantly, it had been recorded in a different county to keep it away from Mark's prying eyes. The document stated clearly that the property could never be sold, subdivided, or developed for 99 years. It also stated that if any beneficiary attempted to encumber or sell the property, their interest in the trust would be immediately forfeited. Mark hadn't just failed to sell the house. He had accidentally disinherited himself. By signing that fraudulent deed, he had triggered a bad actor clause that my father had inserted specifically to protect me. I realized then that my father hadn't just been protecting the house. He had been protecting me from my own brother. I held the document to my chest, tears finally stinging my eyes. The hidden trust was the document that legally voided the entire transaction. Crestline Holdings had paid $4 million for a piece of paper that was worth absolutely nothing. And the best part? Mark had already spent a chunk of the deposit money that he would now have to pay back to a very angry developer. I spent the next hour reading every word of the trust. My father had been incredibly thorough. He had anticipated every move Mark might make. There was even a section regarding attempted fraud, which stated that the trustee, me, had the power to evict any beneficiary who threatened the estate's integrity. I felt a strange mix of power and sadness. I never wanted to be the one to kick Mark out, but he had left me no choice. He had tried to render me homeless and penniless while I was mourning our parents. I called Mr. Henderson back and read him the trust's registration number. I could hear him laughing on the other end. "Leo, your father was a genius. That land trust is like an iron wall. Crestline's deed is a total nullity. They bought a ghost. You need to get to their office right now. Don't call them. Walk in there with the original document. Let them see the void in person." I thanked him, grabbed the blue box, and headed for the door. I had never felt more determined in my life. The offices of Crestline Holdings were located in a sleek, glass skyscraper downtown. It was a world of white marble and expensive art, a place built on the destruction of things that actually mattered. I walked up to the reception desk, my old jeans and dusty t-shirt standing out against the sea of tailored suits. "I'm here to see Victor Vane," I said firmly. The receptionist didn't even look up. "Mr. Vane is in a high-level meeting. He doesn't see people without an appointment." I leaned over the desk, placing a photocopy of the trust document directly onto her keyboard. "Tell him that the owner of 42 Oakwood Lane is here to discuss a $4 million mistake his company just made. Tell him the word void is about to become very important to his board of directors." She glanced at the paper, her eyes widening as she saw the official seal and the forfeiture clauses. She picked up the phone immediately. 2 minutes later, I was being ushered into a massive boardroom where Victor Vane sat, flanked by 3 lawyers. They looked smug, like they were about to swat a fly. "Ms. Miller," Victor Vane said, leaning back in his leather chair. "I assume you're here to ask for more money, or perhaps to beg for more time to move out. I'll tell you now, the deal is closed. Your brother was very helpful." I didn't say a word. I simply slid the original trust document across the table. One of the lawyers, an older man with sharp eyes, picked it up. As he read the first page, his face went from smug to pale. By the second page, his hand began to shake. By the third page, he looked like he wanted to vomit. "Victor," the lawyer whispered, his voice trembling. "We have a problem. A huge problem." Victor frowned, snatching the paper. "What are you talking about?" "We have the deed." The lawyer shook his head. "No. We have a piece of paper signed by Mark Miller. But Mark Miller doesn't own this land. This is a private land trust. The property is non-transferable. The sale is legally void. It's like we bought the Brooklyn Bridge from a guy on the street. We've just wired $4 million to a man who had zero legal authority to touch this property. The room descended into chaos. Victor Vane started screaming at his legal team, demanding to know how they missed a recorded land trust. They scrambled to their laptops, their faces white with panic. I stood there, perfectly calm, watching the vultures tear each other apart. Not only is the sale void, I added, my voice steady and cold, but because the transfer was based on a forged signature, I am filing a criminal complaint for mortgage fraud and grand theft. Since your company bypassed standard title insurance protocols to rush the deal, you are now on the hook for the entire loss. My brother has already spent part of that money, and I imagine he won't be giving it back easily. Victor turned his rage on me. You think you're smart? We'll tie you up in court for 20 years. I smiled. Actually, you won't. The trust has a clause that requires any legal challenges to be settled via a specific arbitrator who happens to be a retired Supreme Court justice. And since the forgery is undeniable, the case will be over in a week. You have two choices. You can pull your sold sign down and leave my property today, or I can call the district attorney from this room. While Victor Vane was raging, I called my brother. I put him on speakerphone so the entire boardroom could hear. Mark, I said. I'm sitting with Victor Vane. We're looking at the Oakwood Perpetual Trust. You know, the one Dad set up. The one that says you don't own the house. Mark's voice came through, sounding small and terrified. What? What trust? Leo, stop joking. I sighed. It's not a joke, Mark. You triggered the bad actor clause. You've forfeited your entire interest in the estate. You aren't getting a penny of the $4 million, and Crestline is going to sue you for the return of their deposit. Also, the police are going to be interested in that signature you practiced so hard. There was a loud sob on the other end of the line. Leo, please. I was in debt. They were going to take my car. I thought I'd pay you back. I felt a flash of pity, but it was quickly drowned out by the memory of the movers carrying away my father's chair. You sold our parents' souls, Mark. You didn't just take money. You tried to destroy our home. Goodbye, Mark. I hung up the phone. The room was silent. Even Victor Vane looked stunned. The legal reversal was swift and brutal. Once Crestline's lawyers realized they were standing on a sinking ship, they turned into sharks. They immediately filed a massive lawsuit against Mark and the crooked notary he had used. They withdrew their demolition permits within the hour. By that afternoon, the sold banner was being ripped down by a very grumpy-looking foreman. I stood on the porch of Oakwood, watching the red fabric flutter to the ground. It felt like the house itself was taking a deep breath of relief. I contacted the moving company and told them the contract was void due to fraud. They agreed to bring everything back the next morning, at Mark's personal expense. I spent the night alone in the empty house, sitting on the floor of the library. It was quiet, but for the first time in weeks, it didn't feel cold. I realized that my father had known this day might come. He had built a fortress of paper to protect me, and it had held. I was the sole owner of Oakwood now, not because I wanted to be, but because Mark had chosen greed over family. Victor Vane tried one last, desperate move. He offered to rent the land from the trust for a massive sum, hoping to build his townhomes around the house. I told him I would rather burn the money than let him touch a single blade of grass on our property. His company took a massive financial hit, and the scandal of the ghost deed leaked to the local papers. It ruined his reputation as a smooth developer. As for the crooked notary Mark had used, her license was revoked, and she faced criminal charges for her role in the forgery. The elite circle, Mark so desperately wanted to be a part of, closed their doors to him. He was no longer a successful businessman in their eyes. He was a desperate fraud who had tried to rob his own sister. I heard he had to sell his designer suits and his luxury car just to pay for a defense lawyer. It was the ultimate irony. He had tried to sell the home he hated to save his lifestyle, and in doing so, he lost both. Reclaiming the house took weeks of paperwork, but with the trust document in hand, the title was eventually cleared. Every piece of furniture was returned to its rightful place. I put Dad's velvet chair back in the library, exactly where it belonged. I hired a local historical society to help me turn part of the estate into a small museum and garden, ensuring that the land would be protected and appreciated by the community. I wanted Oakwood to be more than just a house. I wanted it to be a living testament to the history my father loved. I also set up a new branch of the trust that would provide scholarships for students studying architecture and history. The money that Mark had tried to steal was now being used to build things up instead of tearing them down. I felt a sense of peace I hadn't known in years. I had honored my father's final wish. I had kept the heart of the family beating. And though the house was quieter without my parents or my brother, it felt fuller than ever. Mark eventually reached out to me from a low-rent apartment on the other side of the city. He sent a long, rambling letter asking for forgiveness, or at least a small loan to help him get back on his feet. I read the letter twice. A part of me wanted to help him. He was still my brother, after all. But then I looked at the pantry door, at the heights we had carved into the wood, and I remembered the Leo he had forged on that deed. He hadn't just made a mistake. He had tried to erase me. I didn't send him money. Instead, I sent him the contact information for a debt counseling service and a copy of our father's letter from the blue box. I wanted him to see that Dad knew exactly who he was, and that the only way back was through honesty, not shortcuts. I haven't heard from him since. Maybe one day he'll change, but for now, I have to protect the heart from any more fires. I have learned that family isn't just about blood. It's about who stands by you when the movers arrive. Today, Oakwood is thriving. The garden is filled with local flowers, and the library is open to researchers and students who love history as much as my father did. I often sit on the porch in the evenings, watching the sun set behind the old oak trees. I think about the moment I saw that sold sign and how close I came to losing everything. I realize now that the most powerful thing in the world isn't money or status. It's the truth, documented and preserved. One hidden document had changed the course of my life, turning a betrayal into a victory. I am no longer the quiet sister who stays in the background. I am the trustee of a legacy, and I will protect it with everything I have. As the stars begin to twinkle over the roof of the Miller estate, I feel my father's presence in the rustle of the leaves. The house is safe. The history is intact. And for the first time in my life, I know exactly where I belong. The story of Oakwood isn't over. It's just starting a brand new chapter, and this time, the signature on the page is real.